This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, September 15th, 2022, and I have the awesome Jacklyn Dallas here of NothingButTech. Hi, Jacklyn.
I am so stoked. Thank you so much for having me. Genuinely, stoked about this.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How's your day been?
So far so good. It's midday for me, so nothing too bad has exploded in my face yet.
There's still time left.
Yes. So, hey, you have an iPhone 14 Pro. I don't. So
yes.
I kind of want to chat with you about that because I feel like you have some perspective. And now that you can talk about it, like the embargo is over. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm so excited. Yeah, so I went to a briefing yesterday, and that was my first hands-on with the 14 Pro. And immediately, enamored with Dynamic Island. I know a lot of people are like, that name sucks. I'm mixed on it, is what it is. I feel like Apple always does naming schemes where it's off and then it just becomes part of our lingo. But genuinely, the optimization between the software and the hardware is incredible. And what's even more amazing to me is that it's well optimized for third-party apps as well. So yes, you get these features with Apple Music, but then you also get them with Spotify because it's using the same technology that a lot of the manufacturers and software companies have already coded. And so I think that means day one out of the box, people are already going to be getting a positive experience.
That's super cool. For me, what struck me from the reviews, I'm going to link to your video if it comes out before the show gets published, but obviously, right now I've got Nilai's review from The Verge, and I worked with Nilai back in the day at Engadget, so I trust his perspective. And he said that the Dynamic Island is really more of a status thing than an interaction thing. Has that been your experience as well?
It hasn't, but I also should be fully transparent here that when we're recording this, I've barely tested the phones because I just got them.
Oh, you just got it, yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't put in the week plus that he probably has put in, but from other reviewers and colleagues like Marquez, for example, I feel his take on it was that it's not necessarily something that fundamentally is a reason to upgrade or completely changes the experience, but it's a quality of life thing. And I feel I'm probably pretty aligned with that because I think there are certain features that just make sense, especially the ones that are going to come later on, like Uber or Lyft, having the little pop-ups there. And then I also think that it's just an example of a company working within hardware limitations, right? They have to have this thing on the screen. How do they make it interesting? They made it a value add with software. But also a status symbol, I feel that's every iPhone, right? The reason they changed the color or add a little design, when they, on the Apple Watch, they added the little red ring. It's so you know that you have the latest one. That's part of human psychology.
I know, it's so cool. Yeah, totally. I mean, Apple's so good at this stuff. When I saw the Dynamic Island, I was like, oh my God, Apple, you win so hard right now. Because I'm this is totally what they would do, right? They take something that in Android we've had forever, right? Pills and hole punches, and they're boring and we forget about them. And sometimes we don't because maybe it's harder to ignore on some phones. But we don't really think about it. And they made something of it. They just took it and they ran with it. And I feel that's kind of so smart. And more importantly, it's so Apple, right? Nobody else would think of using some pill or notch or something and turn it into a UI element and then give the developers an SDK so they can do it. It's kind of crazy to me. It's so good.
I agree.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I feel it's Apple at its strongest, right? I think one of the things that is so good about Apple is how vertically integrated everything is. So they create their own chipsets, they create the software that works with their hardware. Whereas on the Android side of things, it's Google is creating Android, and then companies can put their skins and own spin on it, but they have to kind of work within the limitations of what Google is coming out with Android. Apple has the flexibility of completely controlling both, and so they can do something like Dynamic Island. But I do, with that said, I think it's going to get copied by Android 100 million %.
So, you know what? I totally was going to ask you that question because we talked about it last week on the podcast and I was like, okay, 3, 2, 1, somebody's going to copy this, right? But here's my question to you is who's going to be first? I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I saw a developer for Xiaomi already did it, not Xiaomi specifically, but this person.
I saw that too.
I think we could see it in Chinese phones first because I feel oftentimes they are pretty similar to iPhones. That's my gut feeling. And then maybe after that, like a Samsung, but I think it will definitely be in Chinese phones first.
100%. And
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a year or so before we see something like it on Samsung. Plus, Samsung has to worry about, the lawsuits and stuff because they had these issues in the past. Whereas the
true.
Chinese phone makers are like, whatever, we're just going to do our own thing. Who cares, right? And they can always say it's China only, and Apple can't really touch them there. So
it's different, yeah. It's because they're hitting a completely different demographic of people, whereas Samsung is really targeting the U.S. market.
Yeah,
that's actually really interesting. What about you? Like, what is the most exciting feature for you on the 14 and the 14 Pro?
Well, I'm a big camera person, so there's some things on the camera that are really exciting to me. But I have to be honest, I think that this user interface kind of island thing, it's got me excited because, I was worried. Well, not worried. I was wondering how Apple was going to keep the iconic look. So remember, Apple iPhone version, like the 10 years of version 1 between the original and the 10, when you stylized an icon, like an iPhone, when you like put it up on like a kind of, an app screen or something, it always had the earpiece and camera on top and the little home button on the bottom and the two bands, right? Like you could see that schematic from a distance and say that's an iPhone, right?
Yeah.
So then with the notch, right, it became the same thing. With the iPhone 10 and up, it was really obvious you can have a phone that's kind of rounded corners and has that little iconic notch, and it's an iPhone. So I'm wondering how would they, if they got rid of the notch, how would they do that? And here's my thought is, and I said this on last week's podcast, but if you hold the new iPhone 14 Pro a little further away from you, and it's the standard like dynamic island, the small one, the default,
like just like the black one,
and you squint a little bit, it looks like the speaker slot.
Oh my God, you're right.
Slot, remember? And so you still don't have the bands and the home button, but it does have that iconic iPhone shape still.
I never thought about that. Wow, that's actually really interesting. You're right.
And so they're able to maintain this kind of like brand there, like the continuing on the brand, it's familiar to us. And I think it's so subtle that we don't even notice it, which I think is, again, Apple just kind of like being really brilliant at what they do. But, in terms of features, well, I've got like pros and cons. I mean, for me, this dynamic island is cool. The cameras, I want to chat with you in more detail in a minute. I think the satellite connectivity is interesting too.
Oh, cool. Oh my God.
And then, well, what else? I suppose the always on display. We've had it on Android for a while, but they finally have that, so we can talk about that.
And it's a little different.
Yeah. The removal of the SIM slot though. What's your feeling?
Not super stoked about that. Yeah, no. I think it makes I travel a lot for work. I think it makes international travel a little bit inconvenient. I like it in theory, and I think eSIM is really convenient because I feel like no one ever has a SIM card ejector tool that I know that I'm friends with, and they're always when they're upgrading their phones, oh my God, what am I supposed to do here? So I think that is helpful in terms of that, but I would say and also I think the other thing is that you can have up to 8 eSIMs at the ready. So you can only use 2 at a time actively, but you can have another 6. So I was just talking to a board at work who was saying in Nigeria, in some places, you need multiple different phone numbers, when you're just going around for different cellular connection points. And so a lot of people, he was saying, have 2 smartphones with multiple numbers. And so this feels
sense.
like that could solve that problem. They can have 8 at the ready, and then they can just switch between them. So that's a use case that obviously being privileged in the US, I wouldn't even think about that. I think and obviously this is also just US right now, I think the eSIM thing. So that's not relevant to Nigeria.
Yeah. So I'm in Canada and the iPhones still have the SIM slot.
Yeah.
But my theory last week is actually turned out to be true. And my theory was that the US model is the only one with millimeter wave. So remember how the 13 had both the SIM tray and millimeter wave, and then in outside markets, it didn't have millimeter wave?
Yeah.
Now the space taken up by millimeter wave on the US is the space used on all the other versions for the SIM tray. So in Canada, if I buy it here, it has all the same 5G bands. I checked the bands. Okay. It's all the same, but I won't get millimeter wave, but I'll get a SIM tray.
I love that you checked this. I feel like no one would check this. This is a really good detail to know, actually.
So if you like, anybody can do this. Go to the Apple website, apple.com, like US site. Like, so,
Yeah.
if I was in San Francisco right now, that's what I would go to. And then you'll see in the specs, it shows millimeter wave and it shows no SIM tray. And then if you go to apple.ca, which is the Canadian site, and you go to the specs there, you'll see that there's no millimeter wave listed, but there's a SIM tray and the bands are the same. So if you're a US person and you really want the SIM tray and you don't care about millimeter wave, I know it's a lot of ifs, but you probably don't care about millimeter wave, right? I mean, do you really?
Yeah, at this point, it probably doesn't matter that much.
So get it in Canada. And the price is a little higher, but honestly, it's not too bad. I think it's, when you convert it back, it's only $100 more or something.
But
so
I do think eSIM is good for potentially like water resistance, like because it's like one less entry point for water to get in. And that
for
is
sure.
nice.
I just feel like I want both. Like I liked when it had both because then you get choice.
I
And
get
for
that,
me,
yeah.
like I just don't see myself like when I switched. I like you, right? And we switch devices all the freaking
All the
time.
time.
So
yeah.
for me, I literally have a SIM tray removal tool on my keychain. So I just like use it. And it's just much more natural for me to just like last minute, like go, oh, let's swap SIMs. And like now I have to go log into a T-Mobile website or whatever. And just think like for those of us who are reviewers, we don't have credentials to all these SIMs that we get, right? Like they don't give us a login for a Verizon SIM that we're
Very
using
true.
to test something. So how the hell do we provision that on another phone?
Can't. You're going to have to like buy another SIM card or something.
George at Verizon will hook me up, I know. But
George is the best. Yeah.
yeah, he already suggested if we need any help with the eSIMs, he would help. But it's just like it becomes a bit of a nightmare. And it kind of bugs me because like if you wanted like, you do this probably too. Like you have a phone and you're like, oh, I want to test 5G on all three networks, right?
Yeah.
So you swap SIMs, right? Like you can put like
Yeah.
AT&T,
And
you go
it's
for a
easy.
walk. Halfway through the walk, you go like, okay, SIM removal. You try not to drop it on the floor because it's like, snowing outside or whatever. And you're like,
then
oh
it's
my God, my
gone.
SIM card, right?
Yeah.
Now, all of this sounds like a negative because you're like, people are going to say, well, see, you're going to lose your SIM card if you do that. I'm like, for us though, it's so much easier to swap SIM cards in the field when we're testing. Now I'd have to like bring another phone with me, connect, change the thing. Like it's just, I don't know. I kind of wish I left it.
I think it depends on how Apple implements it, like how easy it is to switch in the software between different like SIMs and if you can have multiple carriers as like a backup. But I agree, especially for international travel, it's not as easy as just like buying a SIM card in the airport now. But I will say that I think that's probably the direction that we're moving in. I think like when they do something as big as this, then next year it'll probably be maybe all the phones or the year after. The one thing that I do want to note that like I think people aren't acknowledging enough is like all of the new like safety features, like the crash detections and the satellite stuff. Like I was researching into it, and the fact that like especially for like the fall detection and crash detection, it's using so many different things all at the same time. Like it's using like how fast the phone is moving, if there's a loud sound, like where you are, like. And they did like real crash testing too. Like everyone's just like, oh yeah, like, that's cool. It's like actually pretty wild. Like that's a huge technological innovation. And I think that sometimes it's so easy to just like be like get caught up in like things are always improving. But like that's a huge upgrade in my opinion.
Well, yeah, it's a good segue into talking about this. I feel like for me, what really struck me is the Pixel has crash detection, has had it for a while, and I think it does use sensor fusion, like multiple sensors to get it.
You're right.
But the thing that struck me about Apple's version is how they used AI to train it, which I think is really clever. And more importantly, they use the barometer for pressure changes.
Yes.
So if you're in a car accident, hopefully nobody here has ever been in one, but if your airbags go off, you get a sudden pressure change, or if a window gets shattered, you get a sudden pressure change inside the vehicle. And that's something your phone or your watch can detect because they all have barometers, which are basically pressure sensors. And so Apple's using sound, as you said, they're using all the accelerometers and, vibration and motion. And they're also detecting this change in pressure. And together, they're like, okay, what pattern fits what the AI knows, right? Like it's really super clever.
I really think such a cool YouTube video would be like testing out crash detection in real life, like going to a crash lab, obviously not like getting in a car accident, but like going to like a crash lab or something and actually seeing it in action, I think would be so cool. but probably like very hard to like logistically pull off.
Jacklyn, you're on it.
I want to do it. I don't know anyone that owns a crash lab. You know, I'm going to like research it though, because I do think it'd be really cool. And I think it's like one of those features where it's like you can hear about it, but then hopefully none of us have to experience it, obviously. It's like a worst case scenario. But it would be cool to like see it in a crash lab situation. Same with the satellite. Like that is another feature where it's just like, hopefully you never have to use it, but it's like so nice that it's there. And I think that it's, I don't know, some of the other stuff where like Dynamic Island, which is like purely aesthetic and will affect us more on a day-to-day basis, is really important. But like the features that are like more safety related to me are so important because they actually are going to like save people.
And I think that Apple, again, is a marketing genius. They really push this stuff. Like Google did a little bit of that. They did have an ad that showed somebody who had a Pixel in their pocket during a car crash, and it showed, you know, them, they were fine, and it showed their car and how badly it was, and how it called the number, and they tell their story. And I thought that was very personal. And I actually know the person who's that happened to. So that was they're actually they used to work as a tech journalist. So I think that it was kind of perfect storm. Google was like, oh, we can have somebody who is kind of familiar with all the tech and has actually had this terrible experience, but is fine and can talk about it. So I think Google did it, but I didn't feel like, you know, the public consciousness didn't see it. Whereas with this, you know, everybody's going to know Apple has crash detection and is going to make a big deal about it. And some people are going to be able to say, well, that's why I bought an iPhone, or that's why I have an Apple Watch, because they'll tell me if my heart does something bad, as I'm pointing to my Honor watch. Sorry, guys, testing that right now. But Honor watch does not do crash detection. But the bottom line is, I think that's another thing. Do you think the eSIM thing is a lock-in, though, to some extent? I feel like that might be a little bit of that, too.
I agree with you. I think a lot of what Apple does is like, oh, like, it's amazing if you stay in the ecosystem. And then the second you want to leave, it becomes problematic with like a lot of the stuff. Like even just like when you sign up for a subscription service, how they can have you like hide your email. That's a really, really cool feature that's like very privacy conscious. But then all of your subscriptions are like set up with like the Apple email that forwards to your real email.
Yeah, you don't know what it is.
Same thing with iMessage, right? Like, so there are a lot of features where it's like, if you stay within the ecosystem, those features are exciting and they make the experience significantly better. But then if you want to switch to another ecosystem or even just like broaden the ecosystem, they kind of act as a little bit of lock-ins or like friction points to kind of get out.
So your opinion, 3, 2, 1, who's going to be the next one on eSIM only? I say Samsung.
I could see Samsung. I could also see Google, because Google has Google Fi, right? Like their own carrier.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
So maybe, but Samsung, I don't know. Well, I can see it.
I think the Pixel 7 is coming out. I'm pretty sure we saw a SIM tray on there. So I think that's not happening, but maybe the 8 next year. But I think Samsung might be more likely to do it for the US market.
Why?
Because I don't know, because they're Samsung and they're the second big player in the US. And this is something they can copy without getting legally in trouble. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like nobody's going to get legally in trouble for removing the SIM tray because they choose to. And I feel like the other phone makers are probably just going to be like, you know, like BBK Group, you know, OnePlus, etc., Oppo. I don't think they're going to do that for a while, simply because for them, it's like they make phones. They sell more phones in India and China and Europe than they do in the US, because the US they only have OnePlus anyway. So I don't see them doing that anytime soon. Same with Xiaomi Group, right? Poco and all that. But I think, like, I look at, you know, Moto could be a candidate for that. I think Google could be a candidate for that. But I kind of feel like this is totally Samsung. This is totally something they would do, you know?
I can see it, yeah. I mean, I think it's a good point. I think especially if we talk about the ecosystem lock-in, in the same way it would work for Apple, it would also work for Samsung devices. I also think that it's worth noting that, like, they're probably, as 5G becomes more and more important, and as, like, buying like phones on like a 2-year upgrade plan becomes like less prominent, it does make sense to me that like the manufacturers are probably going to want to offer like some type of eSIM plan, like where it's easy to set up within the phone. Because I feel like if you look at like the way that phones are sold now versus like 10 years ago, it's so different. Like I feel like in the olden days, like when you used to buy a phone, it would be like you would buy it on the 2-year upgrade plan, it'd be like $200 and you would be locked in for 2 years. Now I feel like so many people either buy it outright or they buy it on like a 1-year upgrade plan where they can just like keep trading in their phones.
That could also just be our friends though, because you know a lot of my friends are not tech savvy, but they're slightly savvier than the average person, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
I mean, I don't know. Your friends might be different. I have some friends that are totally not tech savvy. They just come to me for pure advice, and they're like, "My phone broke. I need a new phone. What do you think?" And I'm like, "You have an iPhone right now?" I'm like, "Stick with an iPhone."
Yeah, that's like the advice 99% of the time.
Because I can't really talk them into anything else, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to ask you is, in terms of eSIM, do you think Google should start standardizing something in Android 14 for easy eSIM activation, switching, and transfer? Because Apple has a Bluetooth transfer, but it's only working on iPhones, and
True.
you can take an eSIM from an iPhone to another iPhone with Bluetooth by actually initiating a transfer. And that to me is something that we don't have on Android that's standardized. And I kind of feel like the only company who's going to standardize that is going to be Google, right?
It has to be, right?
Samsung could create their own thing when, their own, because they always do their own, remember?
Version. Yeah.
What was it?
They always create their own Bixby, yeah.
Bixby everything. Oh, Bixby.
Bixby's the worst.
It's so the worst.
So
I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, and unnecessary too. Yeah, I mean, I feel like for years Samsung has been creating their own duplicate of a lot of Google things, but I think for eSIM to truly be the same experience on Android that it is on iPhone in terms of ease of use switching, it's got to come from Google. Because if it just came from Samsung and then you were switching from a Samsung phone to a Motorola phone or a Pixel, it wouldn't work. If it was just a Samsung only software experience. So I agree with you. I think if Google thinks that eSIM is the future and they're thinking about it long term with also their carrier stuff, then they should do it, and I bet they will at some point. I also think it's worth noting some of the reasons why the reason Apple could do it so early is because they were controlling every part of the experience.
Yeah, it's very vertical,
right? It becomes so challenging when it's not vertical for these manufacturers to copy these things because anytime all of Google's problems are a problem at scale, anything that they want to do has to work on myriad devices.
100%. Yeah. I think actually you brought something up here that kind of reminds me of something else, which I think is, does Apple back up your eSIMs when it backs up to iCloud? That's one of the things I'd love to know. So if you restore your phone from you lose your phone, you remote disable it.
Oh, interesting.
And you remote disable the eSIM because you logged into your T-Mobile account or whatever. Now you get a new iPhone fresh in the box. If it restores, does it restore your eSIMs? We need to ask Apple that. Maybe since you have iPhones and you can talk to Apple, you should find out. But I'm thinking that's another thing. I'd love to see my Gmail account have this eSIM stored in it. So when I restore a phone, right, when in the future when Google standardizes eSIM stuff, and I get a Google phone of some kind or Android phone of some kind that has that eSIM capability, and say Android 14 or 15, and I restore it right from backup. Imagine if all my eSIMs were there.
That would be cool. I mean, I feel like
in the setup process, it says which one do you want as your default right now.
I feel like it has to be that way, honestly, because how else would it work? Because then if you lose your phone, you can't lose your number. So I think it's going to have to be linked to your carrier in a way like that.
That would be super dope if it just saved you eSIMs. And that way you don't have to worry about it. It's you log into your Google account on your new Pixel 9 or whatever, and off you go. It's done.
Well, what would be the alternative, though? If it didn't save your eSIMs, how would you see this playing out?
You'd have to manually go to the carrier and say, hey, I got a new phone. Please transfer my SIM to this phone, right?
Okay, yeah, I could see that too.
Which I think is the way it works right now, unless you're from iPhone to iPhone. Right now, I think if you're from say your iPhone 13 from last year, say you're using an eSIM, and you're a crazy person who decides to go buy a Pixel 7. By the way, if you do that, I support you 100%. People switching away from iPhone, I support you guys. It's a tough thing, but support you. Not that I'm against Apple. I also support you going to iPhone if that's what you want to do. But I want it to be easy for you. So my question is, what happens, right? Do I first have to go into my T-Mobile account and disable my eSIM on my iPhone and then re-enable it to my Pixel? I don't know how it works. That's I think a lot of people are going to be able to, and I say people, our friends, our colleagues, our creators, our journalist friends, the Marquezes and the Michael Fishers that we know, and you, Jacklyn, you guys are going to have to test all this out
and see. Yeah.
And try it out and go nuts.
There are a lot of hyper-specific tests that I feel need to be done for the phone, the crash test, the satellite test. And I think that we'll see videos popping up doing it because, again, we need to kind of see these features in practice in these testing scenarios to actually know how good they are or what the life inconvenience is, especially with eSIM. I think that's one where it's testing the phone for a week is not going to give us the definitive opinion on it. It needs to be part of your daily life, so you can like realize what's convenient about it, what's inconvenient. Like, oh, now you're going to like Europe. How's that going to play out? But I think generally, like, I don't know. I think this year people are really excited about the phone because Marquez's video, his review, is #1 on all of YouTube trending right now.
Wow.
Right? Which is crazy.
Not
like,
surprising.
iPhone is really the only like phone I feel like where that happens, except for like a foldable phone. But yeah, it seems like people are really excited, which I get. It feels honestly like a lot of big differences this year, especially even like in the camera department. I haven't tested it enough yet, but from all of like my fellow tech YouTubers and seeing some samples yesterday, it's a pretty big improvement. The 48 megapixel sensor and like the pixel binning technology and the new stabilization in video, big improvements. I think it's actually going to really change the user experience with the camera.
So I think you should try to reach out to somebody at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, and at the insurance. Oh, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a body that handles basically the people do car crashes for the government. Because
and
I
ask
bet
them if I can do it.
Yeah, ask them if you can stick an iPhone 14 on the dummies, like tape it or something, or they have maybe like strap it on so it doesn't go flying.
I really want to do this.
See if it detects it and calls like your emergency contacts and 911, right?
Yes. Okay. I may actually do this because I think it'd be really cool to like test it.
I think you should try because I don't have a connection there. I'm thinking since I do car coverage, maybe I can reach out to some car people and find out if they have connections there.
And be like, where do you guys crash test?
But it's your idea, and I think, Jacklyn, you should try to find a way to make it happen.
Okay.
Because that would be the best. That would be super cool.
I'm glad that you think it's cool
Maybe
too.
put an Apple Watch on them as well. Put an Apple Watch on and strap an iPhone on somebody in the back seat. Put an Apple Watch on the front seat or something. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, and I can totally see like the title thumbnail in my head, which I feel like is like now the criteria for if a YouTube video gets made. Like, can you envision the packaging for it? And I think that like it definitely is clickable packaging.
Oh, this would give you some serious views. But hey, I think that the whole SIM stuff, it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I have a feeling that it's like the headphone jack. 5 years from now, we're going to look back and go, remember when we had SIM trays in our phones?
I think you're right.
And I'll be still saying, get off my lawn, kids. I want my SIM tray. Because I'm a bit bummed about the SIM tray. I don't know. To me, it's such an easy thing. It's just been a part of my life for so long. I mean, I'm not against progress. I kind of want both is really what I want. But GSM, was kind of found on this core idea of the SIM and the fact that the account was decoupled from the phone physically, because CDMA phones back in the day, they weren't like that. They didn't have a SIM, and it was kind of like an eSIM type thing. And so unfortunately, I feel like we're going to step back in some ways, but at the same time, I know technology is so much better now that it should be a lot easier to manage. The question is, are the US carriers, and you know what the US carriers are like, are the US carriers going to make this easier for us or not? I feel like they're going to charge us fees for us transferring our SIMs.
Really?
I think it's going to be a nightmare.
Why?
Well, because they charge a fee to activate a SIM right now. So
how much do they normally charge? I think
Verizon's like 35 or AT&T. Yeah, it's like money. And I'm like, why would you even care? Whereas right now, I literally take that SIM out. Like I have a Verizon SIM. You think I bought it for a Samsung, but I'm going to stick it in my iPhone for like a day or two to test, right? And I can't do that anymore. And so now you're going to have to charge me money maybe for this. And I'm like, I hope you don't, but I wouldn't put it past them. That's the problem. You can't control them. There's no regulation around that.
It's funny because this is such a niche problem for both of us because we switch phones like 50 times a year. But for everyone else, it will be a problem for like traveling. But yeah, it's funny for us because it's like a problem at scale for us because we can end up testing like 10 phones in a month and then you're switching all the time.
Exactly. I also think it might be a problem for my audience. They're pretty tech savvy. They switch phones. They might have 2 or 3 phones they rotate between at any given time. And that's why I want them to know you can buy an iPhone in Canada if you're on North American bands for 5G, and you'll lose millimeter wave, but I don't think that's a big compromise. Unless you're on Verizon and you have it right across the street from you or something, you're not going to notice. So
yeah,
that
makes sense.
So let's talk about the cameras maybe. What do you think?
So I haven't tested them yet, but I will say that I saw a lot of samples, and it looks really, really good. I'm obviously going to put it to the test before I give like a definitive, like, this is it. But I think some of the things that stand out to me is that with the 48 megapixel now, you get 2x zoom. That's better than almost every other telephoto camera on a lot of other phones.
Right. True.
Which means now you have 0.5, 1x, 2x, and 3x.
3x.
Which is great. So you have a lot of room for telephoto stuff. And obviously you can go past 3x, but that's just like looking at the optical situations. And then I think that the new stabilization for action mode is really cool. I do a lot of like shaky video. Obviously you lose resolution, but I think that it does have its use case. I would have loved to see more like night photography, like modes. I think a lot of companies are pulling ahead in that arena in comparison to iPhone, especially Google. And then the last thing that I would think is worth noting is that cinematic mode has 4K 30 FPS. So that's like a cool little like addition.
That's a nice little upgrade. I know
Marquez was stoked about that. But yeah, I'm excited. I think like this feels like a really significant camera improvement to me because it's like the first time in a while that we've had like a significant sensor change. And so when you have a really good sensor change and then you also have the new technology software-wise, like they've taken Deep Fusion and they've improved it.
The photonic engine.
Right? And they're looking at like each pixel to like see. That's pretty amazing too. Like that quick computational AI is something that, again, I think sometimes people just like accept without like appreciating that it's a technological feat. So I'm actually really excited about the camera. What about you?
Yeah. No, me too. I mean, look, pixel binning had to come to Apple eventually, like it did to the Pixel last year with the 6 and the 6 Pro. It's hard when you have a computational photography pipeline already to add a whole new piece of hardware to the table,
Very true.
And that's why Google took a while to do it, and that's why Apple took even longer to do it. But I don't fault them for it. I wrote an article on Pocket Now about how, they're playing catch up a little bit. And it's more tongue in cheek, really, because Apple doesn't release new features unless they're sure that they're going to do it right. And I got to give them credit for that because, you can buy an Android phone for $175, like the Poco M5, for example, that has a 50 megapixel camera and pixel bins. But is the output any better than a 13 or 12 megapixel camera at that price point? Probably not that much because the pixels are so small, there's no OIS, etc., etc. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think pixel binging should be, it's clearly becoming standard even at low price points now on Android. But I feel like sometimes they just put the megapixel count on these phones just for the sake of it. Like, does that $175 phone really need more than a decent 12 megapixel rear camera? Probably not. But being able to put 50 on there makes it look better to, the public, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're binning, that thing outputs 12.5. So like the iPhone outputs 12, right? By default. I think that 2x zoom of theirs is interesting because unlike other, large sensors, the pixel size is still very big when you're cropping down to 2x, right? So 1.2 micron at 12 megapixel 2x is basically cropping to the center of the sensor is still going to give you some pretty good result, but you can't bin anymore. So you're going to see a decrease in low light performance. And I'm wondering who's going to be the first to review that and compare it, and say, okay, this is what it's like at, 48 megapixel pixel bin to 12.12. And then, here's down to the 2x and how much more noise, how much more the dynamic range suffers. I think it's obviously it will, but it might not be enough to be a problem, right? That's the thing.
You have such an incredible technical expertise. I feel like you know all the small details that no one else pays attention to.
I'm a nerd.
No, you're great. It adds so much depth to the picture. It's a pleasure talking to you because of it and a million other reasons too. But yeah,
Thank you.
I agree with you. I think it is really interesting. A lot of companies will just put the number because it is easy to market. But I think in this case, it feels like Apple is utilizing the number because of the 2x thing and the ProRes. But I've also experienced negative things with pixel binning, especially on Samsung phones.
Me too.
Because because the sensor's so large, I've experienced a lot of focus fringing that has gotten better and was really much improved when they had the variable aperture on the S10 because they were able to change how shallow the depth of field was with the F, the focus. But it's gotten a little bit better. It was really bad on the S20 Ultra. I remember being holy hell, this is I can't take a good photo that's like of a subject. So I am a little bit like curious if Apple's going to do well with that, given that this is like their first attempt at pixel binning. And then the other thing that I would say is that it seems like there's a lot of software improvements to low light situations. And so they're able to get so much more detail as well, like utilizing the new 48 megapixels plus the low light processing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say is that they waited till they could create a software pipeline, a computational photography pipeline that could keep up within your hardware, like in a way I think Google did with the Pixel 6 series, at least the 6 and the 6 Pro. And I think that's the key, right? You can always add that hardware to your spec sheet, but if your software pipeline doesn't improve as well, then you're not going to get the benefits, right?
So true. And actually, it could be worse. Like if you don't make the software work for the new hardware and you're still using this actually happened with Pixel.
Yeah, like Samsung, right?
Yeah, I mean it happened with Pixel too.
It did a little bit with Pixel. Yeah, you're right.
The hardware improved and then they were still using all the processing that they had on like the worst sensor. This is like maybe a year or 2 years ago. And I remember for a while all the images looked like really over processed and then they had to like kind of tone it back.
But they've fixed it now. But you're right. When the 6 and 6 Pro first came out, I was just like, I kind of prefer the 5A. But then about a month or two later, it just got better and they finally figured it out. But see, Apple's not going to do that. Apple's going to come out of the box doing it right.
Agreed.
Because that's how Apple does it.
I mean, even the always on display, right? Like that is a feature that Android has had for years, but Apple has done it in a different way. It's not black and white, and for better or worse. Like some people are definitely going to not prefer the way Apple's doing it because it's a brighter. Like it's brighter all the time in comparison.
It's more on. That's what Neil said.
It's more on. That's a much better way to say it. Yeah, it's more on. But what I like about it is it keeps I think it has like true depth, like skin tone stuff. So like it will still keep like the color of your image when it's dimmed. And so like, which is cool. So like if you have like a picture of you or someone and it will still like keep like their skin tone realistic, which I think is actually a really like small detail that makes a difference. And then it shows more stuff on the display as well for better or worse. So it's basically like your home screen, just like lower. Whereas I think some people definitely prefer like the minimal look of just the time.
Yeah, the time and a few notifications or something, yeah.
But it's cool. And it's a feature that they could have done years ago, but they waited. And because they waited, I feel like they've added in like these small details that actually like make a difference.
But I still feel a little bummed that they didn't do it on the iPhone 14 as well. Plus, they still haven't brought 120 hertz to the iPhone 14, like the base model and the Plus model. Those are very incremental this year. And they inherited the main camera sensor from the iPhone 13 Pro from last year, right?
Yeah.
So that's an improvement. But overall, I feel like it's a bit of a miss because you're seeing only the real innovation, especially like new chip, all that is only on the Pro right now. And I understand that, they had to keep the costs reasonable, supply chain issues. You don't want to have to raise your prices in this time right now with the economy being what it is. So I applaud Apple for making the best of the situation. But at the same time, you look at the iPhone 14 and you're like, okay, so it's an iPhone 13, essentially with the iPhone 13 Pro main camera, but you still don't get ProRes or ProRAW. And you get a better front-facing camera. So you get slightly better camera system, but you get no SIM tray and you get no Bionic 16, A16.
Yeah, that's wild.
I mean, it's fast enough. I know that. Like, I'm not complaining. It's not going to be a showstopper for anyone. But at the same time, I'm like...
It's just the theory of it, I feel like.
Yeah.
But I feel like what's interesting is that there's a plus. So, like, that's the exciting thing, right?
Yeah.
Because in the past, if you wanted a big phone, you had to go for the Max, which was expensive. And so I think that the Plus actually was a really notable addition.
For sure.
And last year, I feel like the difference between the 13 and 13 Pro was, like, so small for a lot of people that, like, it was hard to justify the $100 for a lot of people. Now the difference feels, like, big. Like, now there are so many things that you're getting with the Pro, from the camera to the display.
But maybe it's the other way around. It's too much now.
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting take. Yeah.
I feel like maybe next year it'll find the balance.
Well, I think maybe they're just hoping that most people buy either the Pro or the Plus. Like maybe the regular 14 is just there as like the entry point phone, but they're probably hoping that most people aren't going to get that one.
So, Jacklyn, is it time for me to upgrade my iPhone 11?
Ooh, honestly, Like, I think so. I think the upgrades are notable
course.
now. But some people, like, I saw a
I
video.
only use it for video. I record video with it. I use Filmic Pro and video and external mic hooked
I
up
love
to it. That's
that.
how I do all my unboxing videos. And I don't feel like I need anything else because my lighting is controlled anyway. But it's just interesting because I'm thinking to myself, like, I should every year I'm like, oh, I should buy a new iPhone, but do I really need to? And then I'm like, I'm a tech journalist. I really should have an iPhone that's up to date. But like
Yeah.
the 11 still runs everything great. When I get a piece of software to try out, it works just fine. So I'm like, okay, probably I want to get if I'm going to go new iPhone this year, I'm going to go Pro for sure. Because I think the benefits are like, this seems to be a big step forward, right?
Yeah, I mean, I watched a review today that was like, if you have like the 11 or 12 or 13, don't upgrade. And I thought that was an interesting take because I could see it. Like the 12 and 13 are pretty similar. The 11,
Yes.
it is a big difference.
100%.
But the 11's still a great phone. I mean, I think that's like, it's so easy to get like tunnel vision, like upgrade every year. Like I love upgrading every year because I'm like a nerd
Yeah.
and techie. But
Yeah.
I did use the 12 for a long time. Like I didn't upgrade to the 13 as like my main phone for a very long time. So yeah, I don't know. This year, I think the biggest, if you use it for video, there are a lot of big video upgrades.
Yeah,
so you may,
for
you may
sure.
experience like an improvement. But also, if it's working for you and you don't want to upgrade, then don't.
I'm just like, maybe it's time. But of course, you want to hear the funny part? I completely
Yes.
forgot on the night of pre-orders that it was a night of pre-orders. So now I'm like,
No.
yeah. Now I'm like, okay,
Tragic.
I guess I'll just wait. No, you laugh, but I'll probably go to Oregon or something where I can, it's kind of somewhere halfway between my two places that I live, Vancouver and San Francisco, and they have no sales tax there. So I'll just go in the store and pick it up sometime.
Do you think that it's going to be hard to get the phone day of? Like, do you think that there are going to be lines and stuff?
I think it's gonna be really hard. Like I feel like every year it's really hard. I mean, right now, if I pre-order, whether I pre-order in Canada or the US, it's October. We're looking at mid-October.
Wow.
Yeah, just for pre-orders. So, I mean, I should say right now, like since I realized my mistake, right? So what was the pre-orders came October
Friday.
9th? No, September 9th. September
Yeah.
9th, right? So that night I could have ordered and I forgot. The next day I looked up and it was October 15th.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
So-
I actually did the same thing because I knew I was going to get a review in it. So I was like, what, I'm not going to pre-order yet. Like, let me see which one I actually like the most. And then I was like, all right, I'm good. Like, let me pre-order. And it's going to be like a long time. So I'm glad I have the review units. But yeah, it is wild because I feel like maybe last year or the year before was easy. Like I remember
Yeah.
I slept through pre-order. Like I was up really late editing a video and then I didn't hear my alarm. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, you forgot like me. I completely forgot. I
Yeah,
just blanked
and-
on it. I was like, wait, that was last night. Oh.
And I was bummed, but I was still able to get it on time. Like it didn't get delayed because I think it was such an iterative upgrade. Whereas now, it feels like a lot of people are stoked about that. Like I was talking to a lot of friends who are actually like, I feel like half my friends are really into tech and then half of them are
Same with me.
not. Yeah.
It's the same with me, totally.
And
like there's those
every
few
single
that are
person-
like, yeah.
Yeah, every single person was excited about it. So I feel
Wow.
like that's a good like barometer of like maybe it's like actually a big thing this year. But I think every year like iPhone is really the one that like transcends culture, I think. Like my techie friends will care about Android phones and stuff, but like my non-techie friends will only really ask me about the iPhone. You feel like is it the same for you?
Yeah, the only non-techie friends I have that have cared about an Android phone recently are people who saw the Z Flip or the Z Fold. Mostly the Z
Yes.
Flip. Right?
Oh, the Z Flip, really? For me, it
The
was
Z
the Z
Flip,
Fold.
a lot of people love the Z Flip, but then they realize it's not an iPhone. They're like, icky.
Okay, that's so funny because I was at coffee with a friend and I had the Z Fold and I was like showing it to him and he was like, this is so sick. And then I was like, would you do it? He's like, no. And I was like,
No way.
He was like, but I can't wait for Apple to make a foldable. Like that was the takeaway. And I was like, yes, I can see that.
I think Apple, I know they're not going to do it till they can do it right, and it's going to take a little while, but I really think they're missing out. Like, not on a fold, but on a flip. They need a flip.
Really? What do you
Oh,
like
I
about
think-
the Flip so much?
No, I mean, personally, I like the flip, but I think the people that react, like the non-tech people I show phones to, that react to the flip versus the fold, they're like, oh, this is cool. It can turn into a tablet, but oh, it's so big and bulky, not for me. Whereas the flip, they're like, oh, wait a minute. It's when it's open, it's like a big phone. I can see a lot of stuff, and then I can fold it and put it in my purse, and it's like protected the screen. It reminds me of the old flip phones, even though some of them are younger people that don't remember the flip phones. They just kind of like the idea of it. I just feel like and I think Samsung said the Flip's been selling like hotcakes, and I believe it because people can relate to the Flip. You don't have to change the way you use a phone for using the Flip,
True.
right? You just have to open it, and then you have a normal phone. Everything about it is totally normal. You get some
That's interesting.
extra things, right? You get the cover displays. You can do cool selfies with the good cameras. You get like the notification on but like a lot of the people that I know have Flips right now, they're generally just opening and using it. It's just the gimmick for them, or not the gimmick. The feature for them is it's small, it's compact, it's safe, it's protected. I can throw it in my bag without a case at all because nothing bad will happen.
Yeah, that's interesting because for me, I like appreciate the Flip. I think it's really cool. But the Fold is the one that like makes me really excited, and the Fold is the one that like would change my world. But it's so expensive that like it's a little cost prohibitive right now, right? Because it's like $1,800. But that to me, like if I had to pick, if Apple were to make one, I would pick that they make the like a Fold style instead of a Flip style because I feel like it offers so much value, like the tablet, phone, two-in-one. And given how like tablet sales are going lately, it would make sense for me for Apple to kind of combine that into maybe one product. But I think we're at least probably like a year plus away. I'm terrible at predictions, so I don't know. But I think going what we were saying, right? Like they wait to launch until things are like more finalized.
Yeah. I think it's going to be definitely at least 2 or 3 years before we see anything. And the reason I don't think they're going to go for Fold is because they have the iPad range and they don't want to cannibalize. Remember, in the same way as they have the MacBook and they didn't put a touchscreen on it yet, right?
True.
I'm using an Air M2 right now to record this. I love it. I'm a big, long-time Mac user.
Yeah, me too.
Much more into Apple ecosystem for my computers than I am for my phones.
Yeah.
But I don't at all miss the fact that it doesn't have a touchscreen. Like, I don't care. Like, to me, it's not an important feature. But when I'm on a PC, strangely, when I'm running Windows, I want the touchscreen. I use it, right? I scroll with my finger and everything. So to me, it's like, it's not so much the fact that my Mac doesn't have a touchscreen. It's the fact that I'm so used to the user experience of my Mac not having a touchscreen that I don't miss it. And Apple wants me to go buy an iPad if I want a touchscreen. So, and I don't have one, but I could, right?
Yes. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, honestly, like, I think Apple's business model is changing a little bit too, just from like just hardware-based products to more so like the synergy of hardware and software and services, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it depends on like how they rate what's most important to them. Like if it's like just selling a ton of products, then probably combining a tablet and phone would be a bad call. But if they want to sell like the most services possible, then maybe there would be like some synergy there. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll find out. I also think that, what I want to see happening is the Flip, because I feel like it wouldn't interfere with anything they're doing. Like it doesn't eat away at the iPad, doesn't eat away at maybe a little bit at the iPhone, but not really at anything else. You're still going to buy an Apple Watch. You're still going to buy AirPods.
True.
You're still going to buy
That's a good point. Yeah, there's zero cannibalization.
You still gonna buy iPad, still might buy a Mac. I don't know. That's kind of where I see it. But speaking of services, the satellite emergency connectivity is interesting to me for 2 reasons. Number one, they're doing it for free for the first 2 years, but it's going to become a paid service.
It should be free forever, I think.
I agree, but it's very, very smart because they're going to draw people into it, and people are going to pick the iPhone for this feature, and then they're going to have to start paying for it.
Yeah.
And also, you know how T-Mobile and Starlink, the SpaceX satellite service, has announced a partnership where any 5G phone with mid-band in North America will be able to connect to their satellites because it's just standardized 5G mid-band. And it's not just for emergencies. They actually promise that you'll be able to use like Telegram and, WhatsApp and WeChat or whatever. Like they say it's going to be slower, that it's not going to be able to stream video or anything like that. But they're basically not just billing it as an emergency thing. They're just saying, if you can catch a satellite flying overhead in the middle of nowhere and you have T-Mobile on your phone and it's a standard 5G phone, you will get connectivity for a brief amount of time, probably enough to send and receive a few messages, and then you have to wait for the next satellite to come over, right? And that's totally cool. Whereas Apple is working with Globalstar, it turns out, to do this service, which is really optimized for emergency. And I don't think it's using the same technology. I don't know. I haven't figured this out. Some people are telling me, they're using cellular, just like T-Mobile is and Starlink. But some people are saying, no, it's special hardware. You need special bands on there for that. So I'm wondering if it's...
How would we figure this out? Do we need like a teardown?
I think we need to talk to Mr. Zach here and see what he can find out.
Yeah.
No, I feel like it's probably cellular technology, but a special band. So they added that special band, but it's not using a satellite like antenna like GPS is. It's just using a regular antennas, just separate band for that. Whereas I think what's cool about T-Mobile and Starlink is that they're just using mid-band 5G. So it's already there. They don't have to. You can use a phone like that you bought this year for a service that's coming next year. How cool is that?
Yeah, I mean,
you don't have to upgrade.
I think that's sick. Yeah. There's so many cool things this year. Like, honestly, I feel like this is a really solid iPhone launch year of like, yeah, like the hardware doesn't look that different with the exception of like the dynamic island, but like everything they've done I think is a good call generally, except for the eSIM, which is like controversial. But like outside of that, so many of the decisions this year like just make sense to me. And it feels like a lot of really smart things. Is there anything where you're like not stoked on aside from the eSIM?
Look, I love iPhones. It's not for me, but I really appreciate the iPhone. When I use my iPhone 11, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I could switch. But I'm like, so many. I'm too set in my ways. Pixel 6 Pro right now. It's always been a Pixel or OnePlus. Yeah, I'll get a 7 Pro, of course, just because I'm a sucker. And I'll probably... Because I'll bitch at the Tensor version 2 chip this year because I was bitching about Tensor chip last year. Well, currently. Like, I'm always going to be complaining. I mean, honestly, look, I have them all. You know how it is. I have an S22 Ultra as well. I don't use it on the daily, though. You know, I use my S22 Ultra for all my car photography. So when I write about cars, I take all my car shots with my S22 Ultra because it's got all these lenses. It gives me like, I can shoot from different angles.
The zoom on that is incredible, right?
Exactly. And you know what it is when you're out, like when you're not in a studio, out in the field, and you're like, okay, I can park the car in this cool spot and there's this cool background, but I want the shallow depth of field. So then you climb up on the hill behind there, you hike up 100 yards and you take that photo and here is the 10x zoom and it works, right? So that's kind of why I have the S22 with me when I do car photography. And it does decent video as well, so I don't have to carry an extra phone to do video of like the car. I can do a quick reel or something with it, or I can do a little B-roll for whatever YouTube video. And then if I'm shooting phones and like personal tech in the studio, as it were, I use my Pixel 6 Pro actually. Because I find that the bigger sensor has that nice creamy shallow depth of field. I don't have to do portrait mode anymore to shoot for phones. Now I can just shoot them for real.
Yeah, you naturally just get it.
Yeah, it looks great. The only thing I miss on the Pixels, and if Google you're listening, I've been telling you this for years, give me a white balance adjustment that stays from shot to shot. That's what I want. Because right now you can change the white balance, but it doesn't stay because I want the white balance to be locked. If I can do, you're giving me exposure lock and give me focus lock, but you're not giving me white balance.
Oh, interesting.
Lock.
That would be a cool feature. What would you use it for?
I don't even want a pro mode. I just want white balance lock. That's
What would you use it for? Like, what would be the use case
for the product photography, so that when I move around a little bit, I don't have this change in white balance. If I take a photo of the screen, everything, the background doesn't change, stuff like that. But that's it's a niche case, right?
It sounds like you use a lot of smartphones for your photos. Do you also use any professional cameras? Or
yeah, I do have some real cameras. I'm mostly a Sony person, but I find that as time goes, it feels hypocritical to me to be a phone reviewer and not try to maximize the workflow to be a phone workflow. In a way, I'm not doing that for the podcast. I'm using my Mac, but I do have an iPhone recording right now, the audio as backup. So I could potentially, the mic I'm using right now, I could plug it into my iPhone and record like that. So, I don't know. I just have always, I started covering smartphones before smartphones were really a thing, like in 2005. And back then, that was kind of ballsy to take photos with a phone. So I was already doing that and people thought I was insane.
Really?
But I was, okay. There was this I don't know if you remember this at all or you ever read on it, but there was this app called QIK, Quick.
Okay.
Spelled QIK for Symbian phones. So you could sideload it. And it was, get this, it was like live streaming. So you
Wow.
could live stream video. Now it was VGA quality. It was like 640 by
Okay.
480, like push to stamp, right? But like I would live stream my unboxings from a Nokia phone, handheld, with no stabilization. It was
That's
junk.
sick. Yeah, you're like an early adopter in like so many different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was crazy. So, hey, speaking of phones that a lot of people don't know about, there is a new Huawei Mate 50 Pro out. I completely missed that last week. I was like, wait, Huawei launched a new phone? So the Mate
Yeah.
series is kind of like their big phone, like the Note equivalent from Samsung, and the P series is their photography phone, kind of like the S series or S Ultra series now.
Yeah.
And so this is interesting because you know they're not allowed to use 5G on these phones because of the sanctions. So they're actually using a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 with 5G disabled.
Yeah, wild. It's so funny
I
because
know.
I feel like there's so many smartphones that we could potentially cover, and there's so much tech coming out that if something doesn't come to the US, it feels like a lot of tech YouTubers just don't cover it, which is maybe not a great thing. Like, we probably should broaden our horizons and not just focus on the US market because so many of our community members are like in India and China and like all over. Huawei is doing a lot of interesting stuff. Obviously, we're never going to get it here, but I do feel like they push the envelope for innovation, especially in like trying random
Exactly.
things, and then that
Exactly.
like influences U.S. companies and like Samsung to try it.
And you know, that's what I'm mostly worried with these sanctions. It's not so much that I can't get a Huawei phone with Google services. That's a bummer. But it's more like for a while there, they were really innovating before everyone else. Like the S22 Ultra, like you know it today with these multiple telephotos, is something that Huawei started doing first with the P40
Yeah.
Pro Plus. And nobody
kinda
gives
what-
them
yeah.
credit for that. Like, it's so true. But here's what got me excited. You mentioned this earlier
Okay.
on the S10 back in the day. Variable
Yeah.
aperture. But get this is multiple choices. You get ranges from f over 1.4, Jacklyn, to f over
Wild.
4.0.
That's actually amazing. Wait, so can you pick anything within that
I
range?
think, I don't know anything, but it doesn't seem to be just two settings. I could be wrong, but it says
That's sick.
ranges.
That's
It doesn't
actually
say
really cool.
switches, it says ranges, and it's 50
I want
megapixel
variable. No, go ahead.
50 megapixel OIS main sensor. So that's probably a big sensor. And so imagine f of 1.4 on that. That's got to be creamy.
I want variable
Oh.
aperture back in my life. I'm like so sad that Samsung got rid of it. I think it was such a good feature. I feel like obviously having moving hardware in products is tough,
Oh yeah.
but I think it was great because it helped a lot with focus, as we were mentioning earlier. And then also, like, if you want to get into video and use your smartphone, like having multiple apertures, like that's one of the things that I really play around with a lot when I'm shooting videos, because the aperture in which you take a shot at really does affect how blurry the background is, what's in focus, like the overall feel of the image. So
Totally.
if you can have multiple ranges, that's sick. And I really
So
hope
get
that,
this.
yeah.
It has 6 blades. So it tells me that you remember the Samsung one was just a little ring that would go
Yes.
over and make it smaller, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This has 6 blades. So I think it's continuously variable.
Wild.
I know,
That's
I
wild.
know,
Oh my god.
I
Okay.
know.
I hope it works out. Like, I hope I kind of am hoping a company copies it. It's really really the thing that we
Exactly.
can test in here. I feel like this is like LG too, right? When they were still in the game, they came up with so many features. Like, they're honestly, I feel like everyone should give LG credit for so many of the features that we get on even on the iPhone, right? Like, LG had something similar to Dynamic Island a while ago. They were kind of like the first wide angle lens on a phone. Like, they've done so many things in innovation, and it sucks that they're not in the market anymore. But I almost
I
feel
know.
like now the companies can look to like these Chinese brands for innovation and kind of like copy some of those features, because I do feel like the rate of innovation that's happening there, like they're throwing so much at the wall, and so we can see really quickly what works and what's cool.
100%. The rest of it is totally flagship. You know, you get super high speed wired and wireless charging. You got big battery. You got like all kinds of nice, beautiful 120 hertz OLED. I mean, it's a flagship. But what really got me excited here is that main lens. And there's actually on that article, I'm going to put an article from GSM Arena on. There's actually an exploded view of the
Oh, no
what's
way,
it
really?
called? Yeah, you can see it. Yeah, click on that link I shared with you and,
Yeah, let me
scroll
look.
down a little bit, and you can see the 6
Oh,
blades.
wow.
It looks like the
That's
real deal.
sick. That's
I
really
know.
cool. That's really cool.
And the telephoto is kind of dope too. The ultra wide seems normal, but 64 megapixel, okay, whatever. So it can pixel bin. And then it's got f over 3.5, which is fine. It's probably it's 3.5x telephoto. But it has an RYYB sensor instead of RGB. So it's like the old Huawei ones that are optimized for low light. So that should be kick-ass. You should be able to take some insanely good telephoto shot in low light with that thing, which nobody seems to care about telephoto in low light right now.
I do. I care about it.
I do too, but I mean, the manufacturers don't seem to be making anything happen there.
Well, yeah, I agree. And I think like people don't know to care about it. Like the general consumer may just be like, oh, like low light shots look terrible when I zoom in, but like they don't realize that it needs because like the sensor needs an improvement.
For sure. Then we got a couple of more items of news, really. Some leaks of a OnePlus 11 Pro, the renders of what the phone looks like.
Looks cool.
It looks cool, but you know what was interesting to me? It looks kind of like a cross between the current OnePlus 10 Pro and the camera actually on the Mate 50 we were just talking about, or on the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. No, Xiaomi 12S Plus Ultra.
I mean, it makes sense. Like their design language is kind of moving in that direction a little bit. I feel like also because like of Oppo, it's like all kind of related, right? But yeah, I don't know. I like it. I like it a lot too. There wasn't a lot of like excitement, I feel like, around like the latest OnePlus phone, just on like a viewer side. But I feel like having multiple players in the market is always a good thing. So I'm pretty excited for this one, and I guess we'll see. And it looks like a lot of focus on the camera. Like they're continuing their Hasselblad partnership, it seems. Yep. So fingers crossed at that.
And there's an alert slider. We have an alert slider.
It's back. Yeah, if this rumor ends up being true, it would be fun.
Yeah, so that's basically all. I mean, OnePlus is, I've got a bit of a soft spot for OnePlus. My audience knows this, so I had to kind of put that in there, even though it's not official or anything. Yeah. But official news is that the crazy Moto Edge 30 Ultra that was China only is now available in the rest of the world as a global model. Of course, it probably won't work on US 5G, but get this, it's got that 200 megapixel crazy camera.
I want to test this so bad. Oh my God. I love a lot of what Motorola does. I think that they're like, it's so great that they're really back in the game, testing out a lot of different things, because otherwise, like, we really have Apple, Samsung, and Google in the US. So we need Motorola as well. They've done cool things with the Razr, with some of their more like mid-range models as well, the G line. But this one's crazy. But it also, I think, like, goes back to your point earlier about like megapixels aren't everything. And so we need to test it to actually see.
This is the first version of the Samsung 200 megapixel sensor and the first phone with it. So I expect it kind of like, the S20 Ultra was a little iffy on that first 108 megapixel.
True.
I expect this to be a little iffy, especially since Moto's imaging pipeline isn't the best. But I want to give them props for trying. And here's what I have to tell you in 3 words, 4 words, 16 to 1 pixel binning.
Wow. That's like an insane number. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of phones are 4
It
to 1.
outputs 12.5, I believe, out of 200. So you divide by 16. It's just crazy.
So that's either a good thing or not. Like this is one of those examples where you really do need to test it, because megapixels can, when it gets that high, be problematic for focus, for like overall dynamic range.
They are 0.64 micron, which is tiny, or 0.6 even. Super small.
I'm excited. Do you think you're going to test it?
I don't know if I can get my hands on one, but now that's a global version, I might be able to talk the Moto PR folks into it.
Try to convince them, Get on that. Especially based on like how many, I feel like based on all your knowledge and how much you use smartphones for camera-related stuff, the synergy is there.
For sure. The last item on our list is that we found out through a report, I think it was The Verge who reported
I'm sad about this report.
That there is no Pixel book coming. There was supposedly one in development, and I love my Pixel books. So I'm a bit bummed. Apparently, Google has been reorging internally and kind of cutting down the fluff, I guess, because they're trying to restructure things and cut costs, I suppose. But that's a big loss. I think that's unfortunate. I'd rather see a new Pixel book than a tablet. Honestly, from them.
I agree. Yeah, it's such a hard market, though, because I feel like the people that buy Chromebooks tend to be budget conscious. And because it's not a full-fledged computer. And so like the person that wants a premium Chromebook, that's like such a niche market segment.
It's like you and me and 3 other tech channels.
Yeah, exactly. We're the people that are sad about it. No one else even knows about the product. So it's such a niche market. I think like, especially given like the economy right now, like a lot of companies right now are either like on a hiring freeze or they're restructuring to like cut costs. So it makes sense that the Pixel book would be like a line that's to go. But it is a little bit unfortunate because I do think even though it's a niche product, it's a cool product. And the people that love it really love it.
I still have both the original Pixelbook, the 2-in-1, and the Pixelbook Go, the
Really?
smaller, cheaper one.
I
I
love the
still use
Pixelbook
them
Go.
randomly every now and then to make sure the battery doesn't die and charge them up and stuff and update the software. But man, every time I use the Pixelbook, the really thin one, I'm like, wow, that thing was so ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Like really, like the keyboard on that still feels so good.
Agreed. That was one of my favorite parts of it. The keyboard, like a lot of Windows computers, don't have great keyboards, or a lot of, I should say, non-Mac computers I have found at that time didn't have great keyboards, so it really stood out to me. So I'm sad about it. But again, like it's not something that I use every day. Like my main computer is a Mac, so it's not actually going to affect me that much. It's more so just like I liked knowing that it was available in theory more so than like an actual practice of using it.
It's same with me. I just like the idea that you could go out there and buy a Google branded state-of-the-art Chromebook and you were getting the same hardware experience you get on a good Mac, but with just Chrome OS. The super lightweight, super easy to live with because you never have to worry about updates or anything else. And if you're spending most of your time on the web, it's just fine, right? So yeah. So, Jacklyn, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, all your social media handles and everything else?
Before I do that, I just want to thank you so much for having me on. Like, first of all, you are genuinely an incredible host. Like, I love your energy. You're so smart. And like, I feel like I've learned so much just being on the episode. And I feel like you really, really work hard to like know all of the little details and stuff that actually really matter. So I just want to thank you so much. It's like my honor to come on.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, absolutely. No, I'm super excited that you're on, that you said yes. It's so great to have you.
Of course. Oh my God, it was like an instant yes, honored. And if anyone wants to check out my reviews or anything on YouTube, it's Nothing But Tech. But like my URL on everything is just NBT Jacklyn, my name. So like Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. But if you just look up like Jacklyn and Tech or Nothing But Tech, like any of those options, it should come up.
And it's Jacklyn with a Y.
Yes. And then also, I guess, if you're a podcast listener and you like that, then I also have a tech podcast. We post weekly episodes, and that's called The Digital Dive.
And it's awesome, folks. You got to listen to it.
Thank you.
I love your content. It's so good.
You're the best. Thank you so much. Genuinely. It means a lot.
Absolutely. And folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl, that's TNKGRL, like the comic book character, drop the vowels. That's my Twitter handle, my Instagram as well. If you want to chat with me and Jacklyn about this podcast, do it on Twitter. Is probably the best way to interact with us. And then, Instagram is where you'll find pretty pictures of phones, pretty pictures of cars, pretty pictures of travel, of food, but all taken with phones, mostly. I think every now and then I'll post something from a real camera, but mostly phones.
That's awesome.
And there's a couple of YouTube channels that are kind of janky, but they exist. And so if you want to see some content that goes with the podcast, it's mostly unboxings, a few extra bits and pieces there. It's just visuals for the podcast. It's youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast and youtube.com/mobiletechmore. The main channel is the phones and wearables and audio stuff. And then the other channel is all the other stuff. So like car tech, travel tech, extra bits and pieces, home automation, or whatever I get my hands on. Subscribe, folks, and like and tell your friends and click the little notification bell and, all that stuff that you have to do on YouTube. So you know how it works. The podcast lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, everywhere good podcasts can be found. If your app lets you rate or review the show, please consider doing that. It helps for people finding the show. And that's basically it. There's a Patreon, of course. If you want to see a video version of the show with Jacklyn in person,
you can see me drinking my cold brew the whole episode.
That's right. But at least you can see us interact in person on Patreon. Patreon.com/Tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. There's a bunch of other perks and tiers there. There's a Discord server you can join, a bunch of other stuff. So check it out. But you get the video version before the audio version, before everyone else. So consider helping me out with that. And then I want to thank Audible. Audible has been with us since the early days, and they've been fantastic. They have a deal for you guys. If you're not already an Audible member, consider becoming one. audibletrial.com/mobiletech is the URL. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. And it gives you a 30-day free trial, and you get to keep a book if you stay or go. But I think you'll stay because Audible is really awesome. If you like books like I do, and you're read a lot, but maybe you don't have time to read anymore. Or in my case, I'm in front of a screen all the time, so I want to kind of rest my eyes in the evening. So I just put headphones on or earbuds, fire up the Audible app on my phone, chill out, listen to a book being read to me. If I'm on a road trip, it's great. There's a whole bunch of really good content there. Books, of course, some of them are read by the authors, but they have some short form stuff as well and some exclusive podcasts. So yeah, check out Audible, and if you help them, you help me, and everybody will be super happy. Try it out. I think Jacklyn loves it, right?
I love Audible, genuinely. Like, they're one of my dream companies. I use them every single day, and I think that they're a great service. It's so cool. They're supporting this podcast. Now I like them even more.
I just love that you jumped in there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they're so great.
Yeah, and so I want to thank Audible, of course, for being our longtime sponsor, and of course, I want to thank you, Jacklyn, for being my guest again. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, thank you. You're the best.
Absolutely. Listen, we'll have you on at some point in the future, and folks, we'll have another show next week, so stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.